Imagine this. You open Facebook to find an old high school friend documenting her slow, heart-wrenching march towards death. She's seeking $1.6 million to fund her treatment, but everything is not how it seems. Several winters ago, this became a shocking reality for Cindy's friends. Known for her witty and self-deprecating humor, Cindy's Facebook posts took a sudden, somber turn. She revealed a secret battle with chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy, or CIDP, a mysterious and debilitating neurological disorder. Cindy was one of those people who had many friends, but none that were particularly close to her. The residents of Ontario are used to such cold winters. The dark days and snowy conditions often leave residents camped up in their houses with cabin fever running rife. Despite these harsh conditions, the Ontario community is strong, and you can always count on your friends and family to be there for you. There will always be people who take advantage of this community spirit, and that's where we begin our story today. This video is based on a first-hand account, a friend of Cindy's recounting her horrific encounter with a scammer, a person she once considered a friend. Let's get started and dive right into this horrific first-hand account of a notorious GoFundMe scammer. Cindy and I were not friends exactly. We were acquaintances who had known each other in middle and high school in suburban Ontario. But we reconnected on Facebook in 2014 when she sent me a friend request shortly before the news of her illness broke. I hadn't thought of Cindy in 15 years, but I had an affectionate recollection. I also had a vague awareness of her family dysfunction when we were growing up, but she was always quick to laugh. I remember a slapstick need for attention tainted by a darker undertone, the proverbial clown crying on the inside. Scrolling through her pre-illness Facebook posts, I felt a sense of relief that she appeared happy, going to weddings, attending girls' nights, finding work in childcare, and fawning over her apple-cheeked nephew. Before her illness was announced, Cindy had been a chronic oversharer. She made jokes about her struggles with weight loss and her inability to nail down a boyfriend, and she invited all of her Facebook friends to her upcoming wedding, where she planned to marry a bag of jalapeno and cheddar Doritos. She also posted about temporarily abandoning waxing to grow an impressively robust mustache to fundraise for Movember. But after she announced her diagnoses, she disappeared from her own Facebook feed as close advocates took over and started posting on her behalf. They also added a new group page, Help Save Cindy's Life, to update Cindy's friends on the fine details of her failing health. She had built a tight-knit community, and now they were rallying. Cindy's prognosis quickly worsened, and her close friends and family scrambled to raise funds for experimental medications using platforms like Facebook and GoFundMe. According to the GoFundMe campaign, which was launched in November 2014, Cindy lost her sight completely, went into organ failure, suffered a massive stroke, and as of recently, the nerves in her brain have been affected and leaving her speech impaired. She went into seclusion, and pictures showed her in bed at home, wearing a surgical mask with what appeared to be IV tubes attached to her arm. It was noted that her illness has no known cure, but there was some hope pegged to a very pricey stem cell transplant. The only thing keeping Cindy alive was a cocktail of experimental medications that were not covered by Ontario's public healthcare system. Sadly, a not uncommon occurrence. The dedication and mobilization of Cindy's people, their instantly frantic response to her needs, and their constant affirmations of her importance in their lives touched me. Cindy, you have so much support from everyone who knows you. Never be afraid to reach out to any of us and ask for help, wrote one friend on Facebook. You are a true fighter, and I believe you will get through this. Be strong and be you. But given the cost of her treatments, supporting Cindy often boiled down to direct donations. The GoFundMe account set a goal of 1.6 million Canadian dollars, $1.2 million, and the cash poured in. According to a post from her caregiver on the group page, one supporter even sold his home in order to keep Cindy going. It wasn't until months later when the crowdfunding campaign peaked at CA 126 to 584 that people in Cindy's orbit started to realize something about the story was terribly wrong. Access to sufficient medical care is limited in much of the world, even in countries with socialized medicine like Canada. In May 2020, the Kaiser Family Foundation estimated that 27 million Americans had already lost their health insurance following mass layoffs related to the coronavirus. As a result, individuals who get sick have turned to digital platforms to scrounge up scarce healthcare dollars. Instead of demanding funds from insurance companies or the government, many of the sick plead with those closest to them. A 2016 survey from Pew Research Center found that 1 in 5 respondents had donated to a crowdfunding campaign, and that the most common type of donation was to help a friend or family in need. Crowdfunding for chemotherapy or a prosthetic leg is now common. Since GoFundMe's founding in 2010, around 250,000 campaigns have been launched to pay for healthcare costs. A full third of the site's total campaigns, raising over $650 million in contributions. As far as we know, the vast majority of these campaigns are earnest pleas for help. But not all. There have been a number of high-profile scams. In a 2017 incident, a couple in New Jersey raised $400,000 to ostensibly benefit a generous homeless veteran who had given a woman his last $20 when she ran out of gas. It turned out that the entire narrative had been concocted by the trio after they met outside a casino, and the scam unraveled when the veteran complained he'd received only a small portion of the funds. Some scammers have started crowdfunding campaigns in the names of other people's dead children. Others have wrongly claimed that their own children are sick or dead. At times, these scams have cast shade on the whole crowdfunding industry. Scammers have started crowdfunding campaigns in the names of other people's dead children. Others have wrongly claimed that their own children are sick or dead. The temptation to scam on crowdfunding platforms is undeniable. In turn, platforms like GoFundMe have come under increased scrutiny. The company pledges that all donors will be fully refunded if their donations are misdirected. I had been a periodic user of Facebook for years, occasionally spying on old boyfriends, joining but rarely participating in professional development groups, and counting how many people wished me happy birthday. But when Cindy got sick, I found myself glued to the platform. Every morning in late 2014 and early 2015, I made myself coffee and looked for news about her condition. Because of that, a growing online community flourished. Through Facebook, I learned that Cindy's valiant fight with CIDP actually started 3 years earlier. Since 2011, she had been suffering largely in silence, her escalating symptoms unknown to those closest to her until the situation suddenly became dire. At over $7,000 a week, Cindy's medications were exorbitantly expensive. If this treatment regimen could somehow tip Cindy into remission, one of Cindy's emissaries explained, then she would become a candidate for a stem cell transplant that would save her life. A series of fundraising events were organized, including a bottle drive and an evening of fun and laughter comedy show at a nightclub close to the indoor roller rink that was central to our early adolescence. The Help Save Cindy's Life page on Facebook had a Shop Now option where well-wishers could purchase donated goods like handmade beaded necklaces or a half-hour reflexology session. Cindy and her hundreds of supporters took advantage of a number of online tools to raise money. A garage sale was organized through Snapped, a platform for community events. In periodic YouTube videos, Cindy displayed the generous gifts friends donated and the medical equipment she was able to buy. It was in mid-March that Cindy's caregiver took to Facebook to announce that one of Cindy's friends, in a spectacularly loving and shocking gesture, sold his home to help keep Cindy alive. If this kind of generosity didn't motivate others to give until it hurt, what would? Despite all that support, it appeared as if Cindy was losing her battle with her illnesses. Cindy's home nurses, 3 men named Tom, Chris, and Jeff, who never appeared in photos or seemed to have their own social media profiles, took over her Facebook account to update Cindy's friends on her condition, alternating desperate pleas for help with small, endearing details of Cindy's new normal. Back in December of 2014, About a month after the GoFundMe was launched, Nurse Tom had posted a warning on Facebook, one of many such warnings that would continue into the spring. Cindy was rapidly deteriorating and desperately needed money to keep her alive. "We don't know if she will ever be well enough to get her stem cell transplant, but let's give her the best life we can while she's still with us," he wrote. "Please dig deep into your hearts instead of that morning coffee. Would you consider donating that $1 in Cindy's name? I'm begging you all." Cindy couldn't seem to catch a break, and the terrible toll of her illness mounted. According to one update, she was hospitalized against her will when she had a bad reaction to new medicine, and then had to be airlifted to another hospital. She was chronically short of life-saving medication and repeatedly just weeks from death. Her battle against CIDP appeared simultaneously valiant and miserable. A fundraising video from December 2014, where Cindy was depicted as locked in a desperate race against time, was underscored by the Mariah Carey song Hero. Nurse Chris posted on Facebook about Cindy's dramatic rally against her illness on December 21, 2014. Cindy woke up crying and grabbing at her breathing tube. The doctors removed it, and she is breathing on her own. With her left hand, she felt her body and felt all the wires and tubes. I was holding her hand, telling her I was here with her. She is a miracle. Not long after Cindy went blind, one of her nurses, all of whom clearly adored Cindy and mirrored her wacky, self-deprecating tone in their Facebook posts, commented on the arrival of some cash that had been mailed by concerned friends. Cindy was severely weakened, the post noted, but she had taken that money out of the envelope, used the braille on the bills to count it, and was immediately overcome by the generosity. In April of 2015, Cindy's fundraising garage sale was suddenly canceled, sparking general confusion. Her supporters were outraged, almost crazed, about what the failure to raise funds might mean for a woman who was chronically on the verge of losing access to life-saving medications. But social media details of Cindy's well-being were suddenly scarce. Something else was off too. A couple of weeks before the garage sale was canceled, a local reporter named Nicole O'Reilly started to become skeptical of Cindy's plight. She interviewed Cindy's best friend and sister, but neither was able to provide key details about her condition. Shortly after, the bottom fell out. A Cindy Facebook supporter, who also happened to live nearby, posted that she'd seen Cindy leaving her apartment. Cindy was neither blind nor confined to a wheelchair. In fact, she was walking on her own, carrying a basket of laundry. A new reality dawned on the group. They'd been ripped off. Cindy's mother addressed a barrage of questions, writing in a short Facebook post that an investigation was ongoing and that Cindy was fine. That same day, Cindy was arrested on one count of defrauding the public over $5,000 for faking a neurological disorder in order to profit from crowdfunding efforts. A police investigation led by the Halton Regional Police determined that Cindy never had CIDP, and she was never dying. She managed to dupe a couple of unwitting close friends into helping her fool hundreds of people online. They found, but the internet, including the platforms she utilized and the ease of creating an online community of supporters who had no first-hand knowledge of Cindy's illness, really did most of the work. Cindy's story became a minor local scandal, with reports in several Southern Ontario newspapers. As part of a plea bargain, Cindy ultimately pled guilty to a charge of theft under $5,000 and, with no prior record, was sentenced to 2 years probation, including mandatory counseling. One report indicated that she had no supporters in the courtroom. A publication ban was enforced due to sensitive discussions of Cindy's mental health history, and it makes it challenging to unpack exactly what happened. It's also unclear how much money Cindy actually raised, but the police did seize a storage locker full of donated goods and medical equipment. A vigorous discussion continued on Cindy's Facebook page, with former friends sharing news stories and general disgust. Cindy's sentence required her to stay off the internet after the ordeal, but a mutual friend told me that she was back on pretty quickly under a pseudonym, again mostly posting about her nephew. but this time to a much smaller circle of online friends. Cindy's probation recently ended, and the entire incident was expunged from her record like it never happened. She still lives in a tidy but modest high-rise apartment building across the street from Lake Ontario, and old friends who have largely cut ties occasionally still see her out running errands. The enduring consequences in cases like this seem to be personal rather than criminal. "I'll donate to keep her in jail," wrote one of Cindy's former friends after she was busted. "My feelings about Cindy's fraud were more complicated, though. It took me months before I understood both why I couldn't stop watching and why. Every time I looked at a picture of Cindy or read about her case, I felt a distinct stirring in the pit of my stomach." Cindy is far from the only young woman ripping off friends and family members on the internet, using social media and crowdfunding sites to raise funds with bogus stories of illness and personal tragedy. There's the sorority girl who faked stomach cancer and had her friends push her wheelchair around to non-existent chemotherapy appointments. The Alabama woman who stole over $260,000 through social media and 2 GoFundMe accounts, convincing even her young son that she was dying. The woman dubbed the photogenic queen of cancer fraudsters for lying about breast cancer to raise $12,000 in her small community. The stories of women who fake being sick are remarkably similar, rife with specific and theatrical detail, and generally motivated by some combination of attention-seeking and greed. Adrian Gonzalez, who runs the site GoFraudMe, is committed to weeding out fraudsters. A sample headline from GoFraudMe: Colorado woman accused of faking bone cancer, stealing from friends, and generally being an a-hole. The GoFraudMe Facebook page recently chronicled the tales of newly bereaved parents who learned that a fraudster was using pictures of their dead son to raise money, and an adult dancer trying to crowdfund for her recovery, even though, as one commenter noted, Gonzalez says that women overwhelmingly orchestrate the fake medical campaigns she sees. She hasn't run the numbers, but estimates it could be as high as 95%. "I don't think they wake up in the morning and say, 'I'm going to scam someone,'" she says. "I think it's more complicated than that. And I think the basis is found in Munchausen by internet, whether it's the need for attention or something else." Munchausen by internet, a term coined by Mark Feldman, the University of Alabama psychiatrist who specializes in factitious disorders, describes individuals who feign or exaggerate medical conditions primarily online. They may also create fake sock puppet accounts or alternate personalities, posting as a concerned friend or nurse, for example, in order to lend the ruse greater credibility. Feldman says this kind of behavior disproportionately presents in younger women and posits that's because women tend to act out in more socially sanctioned ways. "When men act out, they end up in prison," he says. "Women end up in doctors' offices. Cancer is the most popular choice of internet fakers," says Feldman, in part because of the language and perspectives we have collectively established. Battling cancer allows a person to adopt a certain heroic stance, he says. "We talk about cancer survivors as warriors, and it all seems so admirable." In one fraudulent crowdfunding case he studied, a woman shaved her hair and brows, claiming the hair loss was from chemotherapy, and even tattooed the words "won't quit" on her knuckles. All of which was, of course, prominently displayed on social media. But sometimes scammers choose something more obscure. People pick esoteric illnesses that people have had very little exposure to, so they don't know what it should look and sound like, says Feldman. It makes the deception that much easier. When someone is blogging about a legitimate illness, she notes, even in the most extreme cases, there are days of tedium. Lying on the couch, binge-watching Netflix, or sitting on the porch, a weary face turned to the sun. Constant drama is a big red flag, she says. In legitimate illnesses, every day is not this big, dramatic roller coaster where you have a bone marrow transplant one day and the next day your cousin dies in a car crash and the next day the dog runs away and the house burns down. With the scammers, every day is sweeps week. As questions about veracity abound, it can be incredibly difficult to ascertain any credible proof about someone else's illness. We are not entitled to see someone's medical records, nor are we conditioned to ask. GoFundMe's Gonzalez makes the case that GoFundMe has become like a personal journal where people are already revealing intimate details of their lives. I wondered if Cindy's case was complicated by more than one type of greed. And that marks a fundamental difference between the standard fraudster and Munchausen by internet, says Feldman. I think the bulk of people who look to raise money through crowdfunding schemes do so not so much for the money, but for the care and concern they're able to mobilize, he says. They tend to be people with poor people skills, people with personality disorders, which means they have trouble getting their needs met in healthy ways and resort to desperate measures. On one hand, Cindy's 2-year probation sentence didn't seemingly square with the level of hurt and exploitation she participated in. On the other, it appears that Cindy was badly damaged almost from the very beginning. One early fundraising post ran through a lifetime of bad luck, including childhood trauma, being placed in foster care, having a pacemaker implanted at the age of 32, and being hit by a car. It's unclear which of those things are true, but it's easy to imagine that she was much less content than she appeared when I was initially scanning her Facebook pictures. Reading over the posts written by Nurse Tom, who I suspect was an alter ego, I wonder now if Cindy was just telling herself the things she needed to hear. As I looked around for evidence of why women seem to disproportionately perpetrate these scams, I realized something else. The most proximate victims also tend to be women. When I reached out to Cindy to tell her that I wanted to write about her, she was initially warm and gracious, but the conversation quickly turned volatile when I made clear that I hoped to interview her on the record. She has since blocked me on social media. I later learned that several people had doubts about Cindy's story, but as far as I know, no one challenged the narrative in public. And that's the story of Cindy and her fraudulent GoFundMe campaign. If you enjoyed today's story, be sure to subscribe so you can be the first to hear about similar stories in the future.